Hi, and welcome back to U.S. History with me, Mr. Snyder, and today we are going to discuss how the Great Depression actually affected Americans and made them suffer. So your learning targets today are to talk about the unemployment in cities and what people had to go through there. We'll talk about the effects of the Great Depression on farmers. We will talk about the human and geographical effects that creates the Dust Bowl. And we'll talk about the Great Depression's effects on minorities as well. So the Great Depression affects literally everyone, even those people who were rich and were well off. My great-grandfather was a dentist during the Great Depression, but it affected him because people couldn't pay him for dental services. So a lot of times they would barter with him. They would give him goods. They would give him wine. They would give him things beyond money for dental services. But it affects everyone, either directly through their experience or indirectly through the friends and relatives of them as well. The unemployment rate, and this is what makes 1932 the worst part of the Depression, it hits 25%. 1 out of every 4 people is unemployed. Normally, economically, you want to keep unemployment around 4%. Workers that had kept their jobs have their wages and their hours slashed, and men feel helpless, like they sort of betrayed their families at this point. We'll talk about that a little later. Entire families, they lose their homes because they can't pay their mortgages or their electric bill or their heat bill. They sell their belongings just to put food on the table. They go to bread lines, which are like charities that hand out free bread and soup kitchens, churches. They're called bread lines. Hoovervilles are areas in little cities, makeshift cities of people that set up shacks and tents to live in because they have nowhere else to go. There was even one in New York City's Central Park. People keep their pants pockets inside out as a symbol of poverty, and that was known as a Hoover flag, and they kept warm with what are called Hoover blankets or newspapers. So this is kind of how they express their feelings towards Hoover and what's going on. Here's some pictures of the Hoovervilles. There in the lower left, you can see the one in Central Park. So how does this affect rural America? Well, they were feeling it before in the 1920s. So these falling crop prices and rising debt hits the farmers hard. And on top of it, they can't grow anything else in the Great Plains because they're going through a severe drought. There are over 1 million farms foreclosed on between 1930 and 1934 because people can't pay their mortgages, which means the bank takes their property. So a lot of these people become what are called tenant farmers. And we talked about tenant farmers with the Civil War. It means that they work on the land for bigger and richer landowners. Some farmers give up farming altogether and are forced to move to the cities looking for work where they have to compete with people already in the cities. Over-farming on the plains during World War I, combined with this drought of the 1930s, causes the Dust Bowl. And the Dust Bowl is this loose topsoil. So we plow under natural grass meaning we get rid of the natural grasses to plant these crops that don't grow because there's no water. So this drought combined with the loose topsoil and the blowing winds on the plains creates dust storms that from North Dakota to Texas that move across the plains. They're miles wide. They can move 100 miles per hour, and they were as high as 8,000 feet. And so because of this, the 1930s were known as the Dirty 30s. 800,000 people have nothing to do in the Great Plains. They can't make a living, so they're forced to migrate out of the region. A lot of people go to California, and people who are moving out of the region, whether they're from Oklahoma or not, are referred to as Okies. And John Steinbeck's great novel called The Grapes of Wrath is about the Joad family, which is a family of Okies that moved to California during the Dust Bowl. It's a great, great read. John Steinbeck eventually wins the Nobel Peace Prize in 1962, and this is a big reason why was his depiction of people during the Dust Bowl. So the psychological effects of this, men who are unemployed during this time feel like they've betrayed their families. Like I said before, they're no longer the providers of the paycheck and the clothes and the food, and they feel like they've been reduced in status. Some men, they respond to this differently. They go out to find work, others give up and drink and become depressed, and some abandon their families altogether because they can't face the shame of not being able to provide for them. Men who do have employment are living in constant fear that they're going to be fired, and they feel guilty for having employment when their friends and relatives do not. So even men who are employed still go through the psychological effects of this. Women during this time sew clothes and try to work odd jobs here and there for extra money while taking care of the children. But birth rates during the Great Depression plummet to the lowest level in U.S. history, which means that tends to happen during a recession or a depression. People have less kids to take care of. And during this time, because the parents are so worried about money and jobs, that the discipline of children declines. Some children quit school, some run away from home. Some parents are even forced to give up their children to relatives or even strangers that can afford to keep them. And then minorities in the Great Depression, it kind of hits them a little bit harder. Mexican Americans and other races out in the Southwest have to go through the repatriation efforts by the governments to get these immigrants and even naturalized children who were born in America to return to their country of origin so that the whites can be the ones to get the jobs and the government relief. This happens to Chinese. It happens to Mexican Americans out west. So it leads to an illegal deportation of over 400,000 Mexican Americans so that the whites could have their jobs. Blacks in rural areas, sharecroppers, are kicked off their farms, and they're forced to look for work in the cities. And 2/3 of the 2 million black farmers earned nothing or go into debt during this time. And in the cities, blacks have to compete with whites for jobs, and they're often discriminated against. It was said during this time that the blacks were last to be hired and first to be fired. If we compare, in 1932, the national unemployment was 25%. The black unemployment rate was 50%, double that of everyone else. Traditional black jobs in the early 1900s, like busboys, garbage men, elevator operators, maids, cooks, are now being sought after by whites, and so they're being discriminated against and fired from these jobs so that whites can work them. So it's not very fair for blacks or Mexican Americans in the Great Depression. And that's how it affects Americans on a personal level. Later on, we'll talk about the government response by Hoover and eventually Roosevelt to the Great Depression. So be sure to fill out your learning targets, and I will see you back here in class. Have a good night. Bye-bye.